we're both in the same boat. Street fight, we're probably not. We're probably screwed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Survive This Crit. We're the podcast that combines our love with horror movies and RPGs to take you on an adventure with some of our most infamous movie monsters. And welcome back to a deep dive of Bram Stoker's Dracula. But I think you have a little bit more on some of the other forms that he takes. I mean, that was basically it, what I had on costumes. I mean, she really wanted to create symbolic reflection of the culture of the character of the films, like mix of East and West, and didn't want historical accuracy. She wanted people to be excited by what the characters were wearing, which I think she well achieved. Like, it's not a shock that she got an Academy Award for this film.
Yeah, and I love the costumes. Like, I loved like the whole material everyone was wearing, and honestly, I think you did a great job, Kylie, of just like, you enlightened me. You know, I learned something out of this deep dive that we've just done now.
Woo! That's cool. Yeah, Nick and I don't really go over this beforehand, so we always learn something from each other by just like talking about it to each other. Yeah. This is what most of our conversations are like off the air too, as well, if we're not talking about D&D.
Yeah, we're having our own sophisticated salons of sort about movies and cinema.
Oh, cinema. Okay.
Yeah. So that last form, the bat monster form that he takes on, you know, the one I'm talking about at the scene.
The crazy one.
Yes. The one where Van Helsing like shows up and tries to, you know, repel him away with a crucifix, and suddenly just like grows in this half human, half bat monster form looking thing. And that's supposed to be like an amplification of his predatory and supernatural form. Like, it's basically the embodiment of his violence, and it's supposed to communicate that whole duality between his man side and his monster side. So it's basically just like when he's fully enraged, that is when he becomes that form.
He's like
also like what?
Hulk.
Oh yeah, like Hulk. Or
yeah,
even
like a Hulk bat.
We see him kind of turn into that, specifically just in the face, when he reads that letter from Mina that she's leaving to go marry Jonathan over in Romania. Yeah. And so it's actually more, I would say, like, not just anger, but this strong emotion in general, when emotion takes over him.
Yeah.
He loses control and becomes that predatory creature.
He's always a little bit of a predator, but when he's in young, handsome Gary Oldman form, then people don't seem to mind as much.
Oh yeah, people don't mind good-looking predators. That's what the whole show You is about, right?
Right, literally.
Anyway, yeah. So that's everything I had about the forms. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on?
I think you had some stuff on visual effects, but then I'm going to dive into the book.
Oh, okay. So, one thing I was kind of talking about before that was interesting from Coppola's perspective when making the movie. So he was very adamant about using visual effects and special effect techniques that could only be available 100 years ago, because he wanted to pay homage to...
Really?
Exactly. He wanted to pay homage to the origins of the actual story itself. So he wanted to use cinema techniques that could only be available in the last 100 years. So when he had a whole crew of special effects masters, like, hired, and this first crew came to him and said, like, hey, we're only going to be able to do this with CGI or like with digital technique. Mm-hmm. He immediately fired everyone. He fired everyone, and then it says here, instead he hired his son Roman, a magic enthusiast.
Oh my gosh.
And basically he just started developing this model of like, we just need weird. We need weird things. We need to do weird stuff. And
they definitely get that theme across. Weird is definitely like in place.
And so what we see in this movie, some of the techniques he puts on, so like, for example, he uses miniatures. We see that a little bit with like the train traveling. He actually, a lot of this happens to be like when the train is, those train scenes as characters travel from one country to the next. But yeah, like miniatures for the train, they're traveling through the Carpathian Mountains, front projection, which is basically like setting up this reflective one-way mirror-like surface in the background so that they can project images behind people. It's kind of like it creates that sense of like, oh, if we have our characters sitting in what looks like a boxcar of a train, the mirrors
it's
in
like
the back
creating depth that isn't actually there.
exactly. So like there's like a mirror in the background, and they can project a image that is filmed at a later time onto that, and it creates the sense of like the moving background.
That's cool.
And then what was it? Then they use reverse photography, which is just filming things in reverse. We see that with some of the torches just suddenly lighting up out of nowhere, or even like there was like the way they captured the weird, awkward movements of some of the vampire characters, like Lucy when she's returning to her coffin.
Oh yeah,
That was
that was like the one part that I thought was kind of scary, was when she's like returning to her coffin with the baby and like the contorted movements she was making. I was like, I'm so scared for that child right now.
Yeah, and so like all that was filmed in reverse, and then the last thing I have is like this use of matte paintings for like the wide shot of Dracula's castle, just using basically doing a very realistic painting, and just kind of focusing on it and doing some high exposures to help film some of the environment of the scene, because everything was filmed actually on a sound lot. They didn't do any like on location shooting.
That's crazy. I guess thinking back to some of the behind the scenes, it does look like a soundstage, but they did it so well you would never know.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I kind of noted. I know there were some more techniques, but I didn't really have time to get into them. But
Nick,
I just thought it was really cool.
I learned something new. These are really good techniques that I didn't know about this film.
So yeah, so then Kylie, you ready to talk about what I'm sure is your... You've been holding this in for such a long time.
Before we started recording, I told Nick, I was like, we have to move this to the end because I can't turn people off from this episode by talking about this in the beginning. Book versus movie. I really enjoyed reading the book and then like watching the movie and analyzing it side by side. So in the future, I'm going to try to do that more. We'll see if that actually happens. I actually just bought Jaws because I'm going to read that novel as well as part of my summer reading. But I'm going to break this down into 4 categories. What I liked about the book, what I didn't love about the book, what I felt like the movie honored about the book, and what the movie changed from the book. That way we're not here all day, and that way, Nick, you can jump in, because I know you read this book like 10 years ago. So, as I mentioned in Thoughts and Opinions last episode, I love the character of Mina in this book. She's extremely involved in finding the solutions on how to kill Dracula. She's one of the first people who puts together the pieces of the puzzle every time, and she's one of the most like compassionate and interesting characters I've read in a really long time. And I feel like, as I'll talk about more, like they really did her a disservice in the movie because she was such a smart and driven character. And I just feel like they betrayed that in the movie. Like her one quest in the movie was like love and lust. And that was really disappointing by comparison, because in the book, she's so smart and so well-read and just, she's
I didn't get the sense that she wasn't smart, in the movie.
No, not that she wasn't smart, but, like, she didn't use her intelligence to solve any problems that came up in the movie.
Yeah, she didn't really get a chance to display her intellect or show it off very much, which is fair.
I feel like the book, she had multiple sections throughout, up until even the very end of the book, where she was really, like, using her intellect to help people find their way. And I thought that was really cool. And in the book, too, I really loved the relationship between Jonathan and Mina. As I mentioned in the last episode, like it felt more real and more authentic. And I felt like all the relationships in the book in general felt more real. The things I didn't love about this book, there are so many perspectives to follow. They're all written as journal entries, and it makes it a very slow read because you're reading from Lucy's perspective, Mina's perspective, Dr. Seward's perspective, Jonathan Harker's perspective, Van Helsing's perspective. You're reading from like 5 to 6 different perspectives, and they're all telling a similar story but from a slightly different lens, which is cool in theory, but when you have 400 pages of it, it takes a really long time to get through. I don't know if you remember that from high school reading it.
400 pages, yes. That's why I didn't. That's why I did not read this book. I tried picking it up again like a few years ago. I remember, and I just could not. Like, I could not find the time to read this long novel. But here's the thing:
it's long and it feels long because it's like telling a lot of different perspectives over and over again, and after a while, that just gets like boring.
So here's the thing: I don't know if you knew this, Kylie. So stop me or feel free to join in if you know.
Yeah.
But the whole like idea of jumping from like one journal entry to the next, it's also present in the original story of Frankenstein. And
I've read Frankenstein, but I don't think I knew that. I guess it's
you jump from the perspective of Victor Frankenstein to the monster. I think there's like another character in there. You jump from the perspective of, but it's different characters telling the story at different points. And the reason I bring that up too is because what was it? The historical origins of Dracula actually go back even further than when it was first written by Bram Stoker.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1816, there was a weekend, a party hosted by this man, Lord Byron, who at the party in attendance was Mary Shelley.
And the icon. She was like 18 years old, too.
Exactly. Mary Shelley and John Polidori, who maybe you recall, he wrote The Vampire. And the crazy thing is, Mary Shelley and John Polidori both came up and conceived the ideas of The Vampire and Frankenstein that very weekend because Lord Byron he proposed a writing contest.
I remember reading about this in school and I was like, that is like the coolest freaking thing. Like, spend your weekend with me in like a cabin and we're going to write for a weekend and have a writing contest. And then Mary Shelley wrote freaking Frankenstein. She's like one of the original horror authors as like an 18 to 22-year-old writing this book.
Yeah, and then we get The Vampire, which, isn't Dracula, but it was the inspiration that eventually led to Dracula.
Well, and there was some vampire poetry a little bit before that, too, I think, because based on our deep dive, we had some lore that came a little bit earlier on. But, yeah, no, that's a good point. Mm-hmm. I also want to say, like, the other thing I didn't love about this book is, like, the back and forth chase with Dracula at the end felt like it took forever. Like, I was stuck on these last 30 pages for weeks because I was like, are they going to finally catch this freaking vampire? I'm so bored at this point because, like, you just keep talking about how you're stuck. Like, you keep hypnotizing Mina and she keeps saying that he's on the ocean somewhere. And then you guys keep, like, making plans to do something about it. So, like, that drove me crazy. The other thing, too, that I felt like the movie honored about the book was the power of Dracula. I love that the film made Dracula take on so many different forms. And it allowed him to be more dynamic, even more than the book had intended. Because I think, like, the book couldn't quite describe the actual power that Dracula had. And I thought that was really cool, that the way they did that.
And I think that might just be part of the benefit of, like, all different people taking on the task of trying to make Dracula similar media or, movies. Eventually, someone kind of, nails it down and figures it out. And luckily, I have a new Francis Ford Coppola.
Woo! That's true. So the other thing too is the love square
The
triangle
Love Square? Wait, oh, you mean...
around Lucy. Lucy had so many suitors, and that is like totally what she's like in the book. She's like all confident, all flirtatious, and like has all these suitors and writes letters about what each of them do for her. And so I loved that she was like just as like flirty and confident. I do think though that the movie missed out on the arc of Dr. Seward. Dr. Seward had this beautiful, heartbreaking arc about his love for Lucy. Because in the movie, they don't explore that very much. But in the book, he's really, like, utterly defeated that he didn't win Lucy's love. So...
Yeah, it really spends, like, the movie likes to spend, like, the first half of his screen time just emphasizing, like, the little accident-prone nerd that he is.
Yeah.
And it's not until like Van Helsing shows up that we get to see a bit more of like, he's
a doctor.
He's a doctor. He's smart. He's rational minded. Yeah. All the good stuff.
Like I feel like I wish they had played more into the love and the grief that he had when she passed away. That like I think from a character arc perspective would have been really cool to explore a little bit more. And then, a couple things that the movie changed from the books. Jonathan. He was a much more interesting character in the books.
He was. Oh my gosh.
He was a big part of getting rid of Dracula. And his breakdown after Dracula and his, like, emotional recovering and healing in the book is so much more interesting than what they show in the movie. All they show in the movie is that his hair is getting gray.
And then magically gets black again.
Right. Literally. And, and
he gets wildly seduced by those women. Oh, that poor man having to face the torture of women throwing themselves at him.
Of 3 naked women, Monica Bellucci style women throwing themselves at him. Well, and that's what's interesting is like in the book, the 3 women come back to try to like seduce Mina to be like one of us at the very end. And there's something really interesting about that. And I think one scene in the book that's so pivotal to me is the fact that Jonathan and Mina are in the same bed when Mina gets bit. He's in like a coma by Dracula, and she is bit against her will. And then when he wakes up, he just sees his wife bleeding and coughing up Dracula's blood. So, and then he's there to comfort her. So I think I mentioned it too earlier, like they missed out on creating this deep relationship between Jonathan and Mina because they chose to go the route of Dracula and Mina instead. And again, I think in the book, Mina was much more of an intellectual, and I think that really stood out to me. And then the last thing actually is about Lucy. Lucy and Arthur's relationship. Arthur definitely acted like he cared for Lucy more in the books. In the movie, he kind of treated her like, I feel like a lot of the men outside of Seward kind of treated her like a piece of meat when they weren't fawning over her. Like, they made a reference as they were, like, riding into the house to go see Lucy, like, ooh, you got that, like, babe, like the 1800s version of that. I just felt like in the book, Arthur's pursuit of Lucy was a lot clearer. And when he had to kill Lucy, that was a lot more powerful of a moment because he actually cared for Lucy, and audiences, from the book perspective, you could actually tell that he cared for Lucy.
Yeah, I feel like if we explored that, though, then this would have had to be, like, multiple parts, a whole series of movies.
I'd be interested in seeing it adapted into, like, a TV show. Like, if Dracula was broken down into Bram Stoker's Dracula, actually based on the book, was broken down into, like, an 8-part miniseries, I think it could be really interesting.
Yeah, that could be fun. Take. That'd be cool.
They're making so many freaking remakes anyways, like, give Lucy...
Okay, you know what, never mind. They shouldn't do it.
Give Mina an episode, be smart, damn it. That's my soapbox. But that's pretty much all I have. I mean, like there were big differences between book and movie, but I feel like using the material they had, the actors really did well. But that leads us to the most important question of all: we think we could survive this horror movie?
Oh, okay. So this, man, I wrote quite a bit about this here. Um, I think the short answer is Kylie. You and I both. The odds
Why
are
are you
against
talking
us.
for me?
Okay, Kylie, tell me how you're gonna survive a vampire. I was gonna say the odds are against us. I was gonna say it sort of depends. Okay, here's the thing. It depends on first whether or not we know ahead of time whether or not we're gonna deal with the vampire situation and what set of rules are we dealing with here. Because if I know ahead of time, then I'm gonna gather all of the classic trope vampire deterrences. We gotta get my garlic, which is always around my house. Because I'm Italian.
I'm Italian.
Got plenty of that around. Vampires touching me. But yeah, wooden stakes, holy water, and of course, there's always at least one crucifix in my house. So
that's facts. As an Italian Catholic, that makes sense for you.
I have a cross made from wood from Jerusalem, so I am set as far as that stuff goes. If I have time to prepare, I have the goods in my house. However, those items aren't as important, obviously, as the Christian faith itself. And I feel like that's going to be my big advantage. Because as we see, if you remember, I talked about the movie Fright Night during our vampire spooktacular. Even they make this line, this quote of these symbols are meaningless unless you actually have faith in them.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is my big advantage.
Hey, a communion wafer put a scar on Mina's head in this movie.
Exactly. So, it's the faith behind that actually repels the vampires. And I think that is my primary advantage in a battle with vampires, that level of spiritual belief in that sense, I not having the rejection of God, but the embrace of God in that. So for that reason, I feel like in general I'm safe. Okay. But there's always the chance you could be taken by surprise, and who knows in that situation. Maybe they'd still be able to get their hands on me and bite me or do something. As a proud Italian American,
young Gary Oldman.
Especially young Gary Oldman. Yeah, I'm sure he can get his hands on me.
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. However, also it depends. Not every vampire from every movie is meant to or is said to be repelled by crosses all the time. So I could be walking down an alley and it would be near impossible if this vampire has superhuman speed. Sometimes that's a thing, superhuman speed and strength. At that point, you're kind of screwed. So assuming there's no preparations in place and given maybe only a few moments to react. In those situations, the odds are against us. And even the heightened senses, vampires are known to have heightened senses. So getting the jump on a vampire would even be difficult.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I was thinking, in our vampire deep dive, we talked a lot about the different traits that they have across the board. And I was kind of thinking about the traits for this movie specifically. I was telekinesis, shape-shifting, shadow play, where he can impact somebody else through his shadows. He's, for a vampire in a movie, he's pretty powerful. He's not...
Exactly.
And he does shape-shift into, a variety of forms. And to the point where you wouldn't recognize him. And I think that's really interesting as well. And I think similar to you from a physical standpoint, not if I knew the vampire was coming, I can grab my crucifix, I can bring my garlic, and I can pray the devil out of him. If he approached me in the middle of nowhere, I probably would also be screwed because he has so many abnormal superhuman powers that I think probably, especially based on this version of Dracula, where they intentionally made him a lot more charismatic, I think I wouldn't recognize it was Dracula until probably too late.
We're both in the same boat. Street fight, we're probably screwed.
Yeah.
Home Alone situation, we got this.
Yeah.
We got this.
I have plenty of garlic at home too.
I can get a bucket of holy water and put it right by my door. That way, as soon as he opens the door.
That's amazing. Imagine, I would love to see a Home Alone episode with versus Dracula. I feel like you would.
Dracula.
Instead
of the buckets that are attached to string being thrown down the stairs, it's crosses.
Yeah. Is that what your RPG is?
Oh, yeah, for sure, Kylie.
Well, speaking of which, come back next week for our RPG where we will have Agent Rob back. I think this is the first time in a while since, I think, The Mummy that Agent Rob and I will be playing together. So I'm really excited to play with him again.
Yeah, I am excited for this, Kylie. I've been definitely putting in quite a bit of work on it, and I hope it turns out good. So, we'll see how this turns out. But yeah, I just want to, real quick, as we sign out, just want to thank everybody listening. Thank you, and quick reminder again to leave us a like and even share this podcast with your friends or anyone that you think would enjoy listening. Bye.
Bye.